Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk about CSS in a JavaScript conference. Because I want to say that I learned JavaScript because a company hired me because I knew CSS, so that's good. And that's how I learned JavaScript, because they trusted me to do Flexbox. That's about it. So my talk is about how CSS is hard, and oh no, it's fine. And how that relates to an alleyway. And this will make sense in a bit, I promise. So I'm going to tell a little story. And I want you to all just pretend to care, even if you don't. You don't have to care, but just pretend that you're like, oh my god, that sounds terrible. It's actually not, it's a very first world problem. So last year, I lived in London for about 4 months. But I want to point out that this is London, like right there, but I actually lived right there. But they tell you that this is London. It's not. In an hour, I can do like a quarter of the entire Portugal, and that's how long it took me to get to work. So, and every day I had to go through this alleyway, which is the photo that is on the first slide. And every single day, it doesn't matter how late it was. Actually, it wasn't never very late, because the last bus was at midnight 21, so. I still remember that. After that, there was a horde of Uber cars just coming, like they knew. And so I had to go through this alleyway every single day. It doesn't matter what time it was. But the thing about it is that there was another way. So instead of doing this, I just had to do this. But that involved about 5 more minutes of walking, and I didn't want to do that, because apparently I prefer to live in the fear of being stabbed than to walk 5 more minutes. And how does this even connect to CSS? So does everyone remember the Bootstrap web? Oh, this was just off. Oh, OK. So Bootstrap web, everyone made their websites look the same. And that's because they just went the other way around because it was easier. So it's the same thing with CSS. Like, we can ship all our websites with just things like Bootstrap, but we would prefer enter the alleyway and probably get stabbed. I mostly just wanted to say this because I wanted people to be proud that I survived for 4 months going through that alleyway every day. And that's about it. So my point is, CSS is hard. CSS is really hard. And I also want to point out that you can make amazing things with CSS. Does everyone know Link's cars? Does anyone know Link's cars? I thought Link's cars was a UK thing. Apparently, it's like an entire Europe thing. So Link's cars, it's amazing. This website is the best thing that ever happened. If you want to get some depressing highlights into Link's cars, go into their live stream. And like their entire office looks like an office party where everyone is super depressed. But you can also make horrible things. And this is where I go political, apparently, like the Trump website. This is OK in Germany. So my point is, let's walk the alley together. We're probably going to be fine. I'm going to go through the ways that you can style your React application, things that I've done, and the pros and cons of each one of them. So my name is Sara, and my talk is called The Dark and Lonely Road to Styling in React, because I'm very deep. So like Yanni said, I'm a developer advocate at YLD. I am really into horrible, horrible movies like Sharknado, for example. Watching people fail on screen gives me life. If you really like those types of movies, I suggest you watch Troll 2. It's fucking incredible. I'm also like a true Portuguese person, because that's all we have. I really like football, because, you know, Ronaldo. So about 3 months ago, I moved from Portugal to Berlin. And it's because I'm a really conservative person, and I wanted to live in a place that was as conservative as me. So I moved to Mitte, where I have this sign in front of my house for Dildo King. It's great. I love Berlin. Also, 2 shameless plugs. I'm also a core contributor for Code Sandbox. If you've never used Code Sandbox, it's amazing. It's a tool to help you code React, Vue, Angular, whatever you want on the internet. It's basically your code editor on the internet. So if you want to use it, it's great. If you have any bugs, it's also completely open source, so you can also contribute to it. And I run a meetup here in Berlin called React.js Girls. So everyone can attend, but only women speak. And it's hard finding speakers. So please, thanks. I have venues, though. That's great. I'm going to talk about 4 things. I'm going to talk about just plain old CSS. I'm going to talk about preprocessors, CSS modules, and CSS in JS. So let's start with CSS. And all of these things are going to go through a how, and a why, and a pros and a con. So how? Remember that time when people started using CSS in JS, and we were blamed for not knowing how to use link tags? Link tags. So yeah, so this is how everyone knows this. OK, Cool. But the problem with just using CSS like this is that you can't really import things because it's still render blocking, and that's going to screw up your entire performance. So everyone needs to remember that like entire 505, I don't know numbers in English, lines of CSS file that you had. So then somebody came up and realized that this is just not working the way we're doing CSS because everything is a dot button, and if everything is a button, then nothing is a button. It's like the web today. If everything is a div, then what is a div? Someone went to a meeting. I assume that this is exactly how this started. It was like someone went to a meeting and it's like, CSS is not working. And some other dude in San Francisco was like, got up and was like, bam. So they started with bam. That's about it. So the idea of BAM is actually slightly simple. By slightly, I mean slightly. So you have an article, and an article, for example, is a block. So like a button is a block, for example. Then you have an element that is usually inside of it. That's the idea. And so this is the same thing. So you can have title or text, and then you have a modifier. So the thing about this is that the idea is pretty good because you end up not having the same styles everywhere. But the thing is, humans tend to fuck everything up. We are very good at screwing things up. It's our talent. Look at the planet right now, right? Yeah. And so this idea became this reality. And weirdly enough, people didn't like this. The saddest truth is that this actually didn't fit. And I had to, yeah, this didn't fit on my VS Code as well. I need a 15-inch MacBook. So people didn't like this. Weird. So let's go over the pros of using something like this, using something like just pure CSS with BAM. So it's really easy to set up. So if you're just going to mock something out, I am not going to set up style components for that. Like, no. If I'm just going to set something up, I'm just like, you know what? Tachyons is the best thing that ever happened to this world, and I'm just going to use CSS, so that's cool. It's framework and library agnostic, which is good, because we don't want any more framework wars. I've seen things. It does fix some of the specificity issues that we have with CSS because it has a rigid structure, and that's the final pro. A really rigid structure that helps you map out your components, which is cool. There are cons. So there are cons, and the first one is that naming is hard. And the second one is that naming is really fucking hard. And the third one is not naming, it's fine. Like, I can't memorize all those rules. Like, I know Redux has like 4 functions and I still don't know to this day. Like, I always have to check what is a reducer and what is an action. I also don't use Redux that much, but you know what I mean. I'm not very smart. Also, like, I think we deserve better in a world where everything is a component. Even like web components, for example, have their own styles in their own component. So, Shadow DOM, cool. So then people started thinking and we're like, okay, so maybe we should use preprocessors because they have variables, and variables are dope because there are variables in JavaScript, and JavaScript gave me a job, so that's pretty cool. I don't have any more talents, by the way. So how? So for the next 2 segments, I'm going to assume you're using Create React App 2 because they added support for this. So otherwise, you would have to install a load of Webpack plugins and set that one up, and that's not fun. Except to Sean. Sean really likes that. So you just install Node Sass, because by default, the Create React App 2 already knows what the hell a Sass file is. And so the idea is that you get things like this, which honestly I cannot live. I can't live without like this. I can't do it anymore. Every time I have to put like section H1, it just like kills me inside. I don't know why. So you have a section, for example, and inside of that you have a UL, and then you have an LI, and it's just like clearly delimited. But if there's one thing that you're going to get away from this talk, and I hope this is the most important thing, is that humans are terrible people. So as everything in life, we also fuck this one up. So this was the idea behind it. And this was the reality of it. And weirdly enough, just hear me, people didn't like this. So they made styling for that. And one of the things that I remember that I've always had was like one of those rules, which is like you cannot indent more than 3 elements. And I was like, cool, so I'm just going to move this here. And then that one got 3. And then the other one on the side got 3. But they were all the same thing. So it didn't really help. So this is a problem that I found with preprocessors. But all of these things, I just want to point out, can be fixed if you're a very good person at handling CSS, like at constructing CSS. If you are, then you are a better person than me. And I applaud you for that, and bless you. We need more people like you. I am terrible at that. So there are a ton of pros. One is that nesting is dope. Like, I honestly cannot live without nesting anymore. It's something that I just got so used to that it's painful now. Variables are also dope. Like I said, variables got us a job. That's cool. Also, if you're using this in a React app, server-side rendering is a given, because after Webpack does this thing, you just get a style sheet. And browsers understand what the hell is a style sheet. Also, like, if you have problems with things like naming, you can also just pair this with BAM, and you get super dopeness, I guess. Cool. So, cons. There are more dependencies to handle. Because the thing is, this was way worse before Create React App 2. I don't know why I said Create React App 2. But before Create React App 2, we had to install all the Webpack plugins. But the thing is, Create React App installs them anyway. So you have a ton more dependencies that you need to manage with this. I also want to point out that it's really hard for library authoring. So if you make a library, and imagine that you don't want everyone to use your styles. Like, you want to make a library that people can go through your styles and just change the whole thing. This can add a theme to it. This is really hard to do when it comes to Sass. Because you basically, like, a browser doesn't know what Sass is, so you need to give them the Sass file, and the person needs to override it. So you need to be very careful if you're doing this with library authoring. It's not componentized by default. So the thing about Sass or anything else is that none of these things are componentized by default. They were not made for the component world. They can work in the component world, but they were not made for it. And also, like, I just want to point out that there's no JS magic in your CSS. And I feel like we live in a world where we should have some JS magic in our CSS. So let's talk about CSS modules. Also, I want to explain this. So at the time when I did this talk for the very first time, there was in a small place. And so there was a thing in London that was like, so they, KFC hired a company to deliver them chicken for the chicken things that they do, because they're KFC and they make chicken. And so they changed companies, and the second company fucked up. Like, they didn't deliver enough chicken, and there was a chicken shortage where people actually called 911 because, like, 70% of all KFCs had to close in the UK, and it was like madness. Everyone went insane, and there was like headlines on the newspapers, you know, like chicken shortage, and I was like, what the fuck? So now my Spotify playlist is called chicken shortage because it's a very funny combination of words, and yeah. So CSS modules. Win here is using CSS modules. Not a lot of, no, okay, cool. I saw that someone was just like looking around and there was no one raising their hand, so they were like, then someone raised their hands and it was like, cool, I get you. So how do you use CSS modules, assuming you have Create React App 2? There's nothing that you need to install, which is dope. So Create React App 2 by default already supports CSS modules. There's one tiny little catch, and that is that you always need to name your files that are like your name, so like button.module.css. And if you want to use this with Sass, for example, you just literally need to install Node Sass as well, and you say button.module.scss. So the way that Create React App works to navigate all your stuff is that it sets patterns to check, like, are you importing this as an SVG, or are you importing this icon as an image? And then you never know, and then you can use SVGs in your project. That may have been a true story. So imagine that you have a button.module.css or .scss, and there's a class in it called success, and you use background color blue because you're lazy. And then, so you have so import React, and then you have the buttons that just have one button, and you use the class name equals style.success. So what this will actually do is that you will get all of that, and you will put it on, you will create a random class name that you can actually, probably not in Create React App 2, but you can usually, like if you're actually using the CSS loader, you can manipulate how this class name is going to look. So you get unreadable class names, but you can actually manipulate them, which is really cool. You can create your own specific things for your projects. So then, that's it. So since you get huge class names that are, some of it are just hashes, so they're just randomly generated, you're very much likely not going to have like a clash. I mean, you can, but that's really hard. And if you did, I applaud you, because it's kind of amazing. Also, one thing, AUTOPREFIXER comes by default with Create React App. So that is dope. I once worked somewhere where they didn't have AUTOPREFIXER, and all my shit broke in Safari for like 2 months, because I completely forgot. And I was just like, oh, yeah, Safari's a thing now. Pros. So the pros of using CSS modules. So you can use all the new CSS things because everything comes by default. And also, the AUTOPREFIXER comes by default. And also, if you're actually using just with not create React app, you can install PostCSS-env, which is basically Babel for CSS. So it supports a lot of new things that are not here yet in just pure CSS, which is really cool. So you can use all the new and shiny cool toys. So I just want to point out that variables and nesting are still dope. And actually, there's a spec for nesting that you can actually use with PostCSS-env, which is pretty cool. So they're probably going to have nesting sometime, I don't know when, in the next 20 years. So server-side rendering, pretty sweet. And so I think this is the most component-based approach when it comes to just pure CSS, because it's being built for the component world. Because those files only apply to that component. Of course, you have global things, or just like :global, but that file only applies to that component. It's actually pretty sweet. Like, I used this for a very long time, and I liked it. I used it with less first. That was terrible. But then we used PostCSS, and that was great. So, cons. You get unreadable class names. But you can change this. But it's one of those things where you can't really do anything about it, because if you change it, then it's going to make a normal class name, and then it's going to collapse, and then you end up with the same problem, so you just might as well just leave unreadable class names. So it's one of those things where, like, what is wrong with you, dude? Remember when we search things on like an HTML page by their class name? That's dead. So you have more dependencies again, but, well, it's NPM world. There's really not a lot you can do. And also a thing that I want to point out is that CSS modules by itself is pretty sweet, but in order to get really cool things like variables and like nesting, it needs to be paired with either Sass, Less, Stylus. I've actually never used Stylus in my life, or PostCSS for like a really good developer experience. Otherwise, it's pretty sweet, but you really need this to make it like super dope. Also, like, you can abuse class names, but again, you can abuse anything. That sounded weird. CSS and JS. Okay, cool. So first thing that I want to say is that I will focus on style components, not for any particular reason, then that's the one I've used the most. So that's about it. There are a ton of libraries. I've also used Emotion, which is also pretty good. But I'm going to focus on style components in this one. I like their syntax, so that's it. So how do you actually use style components? And from now on, this is completely agnostic. This doesn't require you to use create React app 2, and it doesn't require you to use any specific thing. Like, you can be using your own Webpack weird thing that you put up on GitLab because you don't want people on GitHub to see it. I don't know. And so what you do is just you yarn add or you npm install style components, and that's it. So now you have style components in your app. They don't do anything, but they're there. That's cool. They're in your package JSON. Okay, so how do you actually use it? And like the first time I saw this was actually a React Amsterdam. Oh no, I didn't see it. No. I lost the first boat. Okay, but it was actually a React Amsterdam. I saw it afterwards. And my first thinking was the same thing as Kid said. Was like, what the fuck is this, Max? Damn you, kid. He's like 21. That's so depressing. Okay, so you create a const, and I just call it chicken. You can call it anything you want. So that's going to be the name of your component. So what happens when style components does this thing is that this actually creates a React component. So it doesn't actually just create a class or something. It creates an entire React component. So you define it, and then you say style.main. In this case, I want this to be a main tag. So all of HTML tags can be used as just the dot notation. So you can just say dot h1, dot main, dot something. If you want to style something like a link from like Gatsby or something like that, you just need to open parentheses and just put link inside of it instead of that, so that style components can actually recognize it as an outside component. And you just give it your props. And so in here, you just return it like this. So this is the way the style components work. So there are a couple of things that I like about style components. First of all is that you don't have, I don't like object notation for CSS. I know there are a lot of people that like it. I don't, and I apologize if that hurts anyone, but I don't. And this allows you to write like normal CSS that you would write in a CSS style sheet. And that was really what got me into style components. Also, I think I've actually told this to a friend a couple of days ago. Yes, I have friends. I know it's weird. There's like 2 of them. They're all here. No, I'm kidding. And it was, I think, a lot of people, mainly the people who use Create React App, which is pretty much everyone, got into using emotion or style components because they either used plain CSS or they used CSS and JS. Because there was nothing else that you could use to create React app unless you either rejected or used the really weird rewrite that people did on the internet. And that's actually how I started using it. I used it at work, and I was like, this is not bad. And then I wanted to start a project, and I was like, oh my god, no. It was just like, fuck it, yarn add style components. And that's how I started using CSS and JS. And I'm not sure that was just me, but I think no. I'm not that special. So then the thing is, this gives you JavaScript that like gets a whole bunch of CSS and puts it in your head tag. So this doesn't actually give you server-side rendering by default, because it's JavaScript. So I'm not going to lie, it's not as fast, obviously, because it's not JavaScript, because it's not CSS. But there are ways to do server-side rendering. So this is a whole bunch of code. So this is using Express. And what I'm doing is, like, when I get the any route, this is from Razzle. Yeah, this is from a Razzle app that I have. So Razzle just makes universal React things. So you say new server style sheet, and then you collect all the styles from your app, and you say sheet that gets style tags. So basically what this will do is that you will go into your app and be like, okay, what CSS do you need, son? I'm gonna get that shit for you. And it's gonna go there, and it's gonna put everything in those style tags. And then when you do your thing, you just put your style tags in the head. You will also define the actual like style, like the things. You'll also define that. So you're good, you're set, you're good to go. I've actually, there's a lot of documentation about this, and I've actually never encountered any issues with server-side rendering this. So I've encountered a ton of issues with random stuff, but actually never with neither style components or emotion. Work perfectly. So themes. This is one of the biggest pain points of doing library authoring, for example, is theming. People cannot theme shit. It's not cool. So the way you create themes here is that there is a function, a component called theme provider, and all you need to pass to it is a theme. Makes sense. So you create an object that can have whatever you want. Like, it doesn't need to only have colors. I also put usually spacing in it, and spacing and colors, yeah. And so you just wrap your entire app. In this case, I called it main, but down here, I called it app. So that's cool. So that's a bug. And just wrap it all around your app, and you should be ready to go. So then you need to actually use these things. So the thing about style components and emotion and a lot of CSS and JS libraries is that they basically create your styles from your props and from your state. So they're the most React way that you can go, basically, which is pretty cool. So wherever you go, style components has access to your props. And so you say color props and props.theme.gray. This will give you the gray color that I defined here, basically. And one thing that actually took me some time to realize, because like I've said, I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, is that you can do anything in here. Because this is a normal function. I know, I'm not very smart. But wait for it. You can have switch statements in your CSS. Who doesn't fucking want that? That's terrible. But you can. I've done that. I cried a bit. It was great. It worked. I think in programming, sometimes you need to stop and be like, not think of like, can I, but think of like, should I do this? Is this a good idea? It's usually not. So, what are some pros of using things like CSS and JS? I think one of the main things that I have is like conditionals in CSS. So I can have something like a prop that is just block, for example. And if the prop is block, okay, no, probably flex. So I have a prop called flex, and if the prop is flex, then the display is flex. If it's not, the display is block. Cool. So you have conditionals in CSS, and that's something that I've always wanted without having to create external classes. Theming is super easy. This is something that I really appreciate, because you can use your entire system, it's not a system, your entire components, on another app and just put a different color scheme on it. I know that themes are more than just colors. You know what I mean. So just put fonts and all of that stuff. And you don't have a lot more specificity problems. I mean, one thing that you can do here, for example, is that I have this main, and if I have like a ton of stuff in it, I can still call it, so like I call this main, and then inside of it, I'm just like h1, and then inside of it, I'm like span. You can do this, but I think the entire point of using things like this is that your component, your style is for that component. I do that. I don't like it, but you can do things like that. So you can actually use the cascade in your favor if you want to, and just call things that are inside of this main. Okay, so it auto-prefixes everything for you. But like good auto-prefix, not that kind of auto-prefix that will just like WebKit border radius. That's been out for like ever. Also, I just want to point out that naming things isn't that hard anymore, because the thing that you find with style components is that you end up with a lot of things that are just main styled. And it's fine. You don't care. So there are cons, obviously. You know, my voice got all serious. There are cons. Nope, yes. Okay, so it forces you to think about CSS in a completely different way. I feel that this happened with Flexbox, which forced us to think about CSS in a completely different way. And we got used to it, and honestly, I can't live without Flexbox anymore. So yeah, I think we can get used to it. So it's another thing to teach people. So like, if you get someone who's never touched CSS and JS, they're like, what is this? And you have to teach them how to use that, and you have to teach them how to add things to the theme, and you need to teach them all of these things. So depending on where you work, it's another thing to teach people. So depending, this is my personal preference. You may love this. I hate it. So depending on the CSS and JS library that you choose, you may have to use object-based CSS. Some libraries, like the one that I showed in Emotion again, have both options. So yeah. So if your app is server-side rendered, but your styles are not, it's terrible. There's that flash of like nothingness, and you're just like, what the fuck was that? Okay. But now that I've shown you 5 different things, I want to point out that no one is wrong. Like, the way you're doing CSS is not wrong. The way I'm doing CSS is not wrong. It's also not right. And that's the beauty of the way that React works, is that there are very much different ways of doing things. I also think that was not a sentence. But the thing is, also, no one is right. It all depends on what it's used for. So imagine that I'm making a small app. I make a lot of dumb stuff on the internet. And imagine that I'm just making one of these like dumb stuff. I'm not going to set up an entire theme and style system for this dumb thing that I'm building. Otherwise, I won't even build anything. And what would the internet be? Better. If you're doing this, use CSS. For God's sake, just put some CSS on that. Or just use something like tachyons. If you never used of tachyons, it's like super cool bootstrap. It's great. And it all depends on what it's used for. But if I'm making a huge app, I want scalability, obviously. So I'll probably go for something different. So I just want to say that use what makes you code better and what makes you code faster. Because in this case, this does not affect a user. If you do SSR right, this does not affect a user. This is all about how you like to code and how you like things to be shown to people. And I just want to say that any of these things can bring GeoCities back. And that's really all I want from the internet. And I feel like the internet is letting me down on that one. So let's just all bring GeoCities back. Let's make things. Let's make dumb things. Not everything needs to be great. Let's try technology and make dumb things for it. You're going to learn a lot, and it's going to be great. And yeah, so that's all I have. Thank you so much for having me. My slides are there.
Massive applause for Sara Vieira!